Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first Politics in a Pub for 2022. I'm Ken Pattermore, and I'm a member of this evening's organising event. We're gathered here at this bend in the river to talk, to listen, to question, much like the traditional owners of this land, the Yagara and the Turrbal people. That they've done that for the millennia. I acknowledge that ownership and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Politics in the Pub is a community engagement event of the New Farm Neighbourhood Centre with the support of Communify Queensland. Every Politics in the Pub event is organised and planned by a team of volunteers. We try to tap into the zeitgeist so that we can debate contemporary issues of importance to our community. This is one of our set-piece events. It is the candidates' debate. On this occasion, we have offered all the candidates sitting for the seat of Brisbane the opportunity to present themselves to the electorate and to respond to your questions. We're incredibly grateful for this group to have willingly accepted that challenge. And what is quickly going to become another set-piece event is the Politics in a Pub Comedy Festival debate. This will be on Star Wars Day, the night of, as in May the 4th. And in that for that event, we've got two teams of local and interstate comics that will be going head-to-head in an intergalactic battle with wits as sharp as lightsabers to decide whether the Force is with us for the upcoming election. They'll do that over there in the main theatre. It is a ticketed event. Tickets are $19.90 and the proceeds are going to go to the New Farm Neighbourhood Centre. So we'll be live streaming the event via Facebook, and feel free to tweet about the discussion using the tag #PipNewFarm. We'll also be taking questions after the candidates have had their discussion. Kat and I are the question wranglers tonight, and you'll need to get our attention, and we'll give you the microphone when it's your turn. There is one trick to this. This is a performance space, but no Shakespearean soliloquies, please. A quick question is a good question, and we want to give as many people the opportunity to ask a question. Finally, I want to acknowledge the generosity and thank those who've made this event possible. First of all, the Powerhouse for hosting us and supporting the Neighbourhood Centre by the Comedy Festival debate. The financial support is received also from patrons of New Farm and My Village News. Patrons is a group of community-minded locals who financially support the work of the Neighbourhood Centre, assisting those most vulnerable in our local area. And you can find out more about what the patrons get up to at their website, which is all one word, patronsofnewfarm.com.au. My Village News, of course, is the must-read local newspaper. There are now 2 different locality-specific editions hitting the street each month, and it now has its own Insta page with about 2,000 followers, which is not too bad. I also want to thank my fellow Politics in a Pub committee members, clearly tonight's candidates, and our MC, Rebecca Levingston. Now, most of you probably know that Rebecca runs a highly rated morning show on ABC Radio. She also runs a husband and a couple of small humans, and still finds time to be a regular MC at these events, and we're most grateful for that. Thank you, Rebecca, and over to you.
Thank you, Ken. I like the decorations, ladies and gentlemen. This is not for the Comedy Festival. This is for the candidate forum you're about to witness. Let's hope that the diversity of colour, the sassiness of the decorations, and the kind of genuine energy flows down through to you and to these guys as well. It is really a delight to be with you tonight. In the seat of Brisbane, you are a key seat. You're going to get a lot of attention over the next 3.5 weeks. Ask for what you need. You're probably going to get it. 115,000 people technically in the room tonight. I think that's about the voter count from the last election. 115,000? Yes? Yeah? 117. Oh, okay. We're getting higher. But I mean, it is great that you have such a keenly contested seat, a genuine contest of ideas. I think I see Andrew Bartlett in the audience tonight. Last election, a fascinating, I don't want to call it a fight, a fascinating contest emerged, and your seat is richer, is better as a result. So tonight, hopefully, more ideas, a diversity of platforms and viewpoints. We're going to have a bit of a chat up here, but essentially the bulk of tonight is all about you, with the possible interlude of about 7 o'clock tonight when a huge comedy festival show gets underway. At the back of the room, there might be a bit of hubbub because David O'Doherty, who's a fabulous Irish comedian, is in town tonight, and I think about 600 people are going to go through the doors. So keep that in mind. They might decide to stay and join us tonight. Who knows? If anyone's got any jokes along the way, feel free to tell them. So in the seat of Brisbane, there are 7 candidates. 5 of them are here with you tonight. And let's kick off by, I guess, getting everyone to give a bit of an introduction. Keep it tight, keep it bright, but tell us who you are and what do you think are the main issues that the voters care about in the seat of Brisbane. And let's start out with the incumbent Trevor Evans from the LNP. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a round of applause.
Thanks, Rebecca. Evening, everybody. I'm Trevor Evans. I'm the federal member for Brisbane, and in recent years, I've been the assistant minister in charge of all things recycling. I guess if I could put something on the table right from the outset, it would be that Brisbane needs a detailed local plan, because while we all agree, I think that Brisbane's broadly heading in the right direction. As we continue to grow very quickly, as everyone wants to move here and live here and work here, we're going to have our challenges to protect our lifestyle, our amenity, our environment, our services, our economy, our security. I'm the candidate for Brisbane who has a detailed local plan. I have the experience and the work ethic to deliver it. And I've got to say, every single day that I've woken up and been the member for Brisbane, I have bounced out of bed every day with full of energy, keen to work hard, to roll my sleeves up and to make a difference wherever I can. We've achieved a lot over the years, and with your ongoing support, I think we can continue to ensure that Brisbane has the bright, strong future ahead of it that we all know it does. Thanks.
Thank you, Trevor. Good pitch. Not a lot of personal stuff in there. Give us the 30 seconds on, where have you worked? What do you like? You can tell a joke. I don't know.
Yeah.
A little bit of human stuff.
Immediately before politics, I was the CEO of the Retail Association. And in that role, I was an advocate for retailers, restaurateurs, small businesses, like my family background. I came to politics not as somebody who has a family background in politics. In fact, most of my family are small business owners who, I guess, are pretty dismissive and look down on politicians and governments generally. But when I went to university, I started to, study law and read about economics and history, and I started to ask big questions around how the world works, how it could work. I wrote to each of the major parties and some of the minor ones at that time, said, send me your values, send me your platforms. I read through them all in the weeks and months that followed, and ultimately I joined the Liberal Party, and it was that role advocating for small business owners, walking out of a lot of meetings with regulators and government decision makers thinking not enough people in government know what it's like to be in small business and to make those decisions. That's what it was that made me ultimately put my hand up and run for Parliament.
All right. Trevor, we'll talk about how often Scott Morrison is calling you a little bit later, but from one small businessman to another, Justin Mark Knudson is here tonight as well, ladies and gentlemen, from the United Australia Party. Justin, who are you? What do you do?
My name's Justin Knudson, and thank you all for coming down and taking an interest in politics tonight. This is going to be a big election, and there's some pretty important issues on the table. I'm a small business owner, have been in Brisbane and in the Brisbane community for the last 30 years or so. So I'm starting to show my age now by my lovely grey locks. But I'm joined and put my hand up to run with the UAP because I got finally over the governments in Australia taking control of my freedoms and my freedom of choice. our key policies, my key policy is really regarding the rising interest rates. We got news today that that the inflation rate has hit 5.1%, which was higher than expected, and so interest rates are going to be a foregone conclusion. So with the party, we've put together a policy, you've probably seen it on all of those damn yellow boards, that we're going to cap 3% as a maximum on home loan interest rates for the next 5 years, because we understand that many people are under mortgage stress at the moment, and with the rise in interest rates that are inevitable, that many people are going to lose their homes, and that can cause a major knock-on effect. And largely this is to do with the $1.3 trillion that we have accumulated in debt over the last decade or so. So we have a policy to address that debt, and which will be putting forth a 15% licence fee on all iron ore exports over the next 20 years, which will pay off that debt and keep the balance sheet of Australia clear to fund everything else that we need to do to move forward. But I'm also very passionate about Brisbane. I've lived here for 30 or more years, 35 years. And being in the hospitality industry, I've found that I do have a passion for serving people. I really enjoyed that. I'm not the servant, but I certainly enjoy the interaction and helping people where I can. And that's kind of what I'm extending in what I'm doing here to the rest of Brisbane and the rest of the people of Australia, if possible. So I just hope to be a strong voice for the concerns of Brisbane, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have got to say and addressing your main concerns, because I'm here to listen and then react to that. So that's hopefully we might get some votes along the way.
Make him feel welcome, ladies and gents. Justin. Oh, a woohoo from the balcony. Back to our original couch. Tiana Kennedy is here tonight as well, representing the Animal Justice Party. Tiana, make your introduction, please.
Yeah, hello everyone. I was a bit anxious, so I actually wrote down what I was going to say.
That's fine.
That's all right.
I talk every day on the radio and I have a million notes, so no one needs to know, except that tonight we're exposed. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I admit that I'm not a good public speaker, but I have a big heart and a moderately sized brain. Not only do we want good problem solvers as politicians, but we want good listeners and people who are empathetic and compassionate. Politicians that will protect the people, planet and the animals, not corporate dollars. We've all seen what happens when we ignore climate change, and it's only going to get worse with inaction. The IPCC has given us 29 months before the point of no return and warned that even if we gave up all fossil fuel dependence now, we would still suffer the consequences of climate change from animal agriculture. When Greta Thunberg yelled at the world, we listened, and now I'm yelling. Australia is the worst in the world for species extinction, and it is regarded as one of the worst in the world for deforestation, tying with the Amazon rainforest. We are also considered one of the worst countries in the world for animal protection, scoring a D overall, tying with Russia, China and Ethiopia, and scoring an E for farmed animal protection. I've had enough, and I bet you have too. Vote for me, and they'll have to sit in Parliament with an angry 18-year-old, which would be fun to watch. So vote Animal Justice Party.
Good on you, Tiana. Quick tick, we just acknowledge a politician or aspiring politician who describes herself as having a moderately sized brain, which most of us do. Honesty in politics is a brilliant thing. Madonna Jarrett's here tonight, ladies and gents, from the Australian Labor Party. Who are you, Madonna?
Good evening, everybody. And first, can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today? Our First Nations people are our traditional owners, always were, always will be. And who am I then? So I'm a local girl. I grew up in Paddington, not too far from here, born and raised there. I come from a very large family. I'm one of 7 girls and a brother. And we lived the values of looking after each other and being fair to everybody. And that's how I grew up. And so that really are the 2 values that underpin every decision and thinking that I undertake in relation to government policies, work, etc. So it's no surprise that I did start my career in the health sector. I was in the allied health sector. I then went and worked for the state government for a bit, but for the last 20 years I've worked in the private sector. I have had the fortunate opportunity to live and work overseas, which I think has given me a really strong respect for what we have here in Australia and where things could go amiss. And that's part of the reason why I put my hand up to run for politics. About a year ago, I had one of those aha moments where I thought, my goodness, this country is heading in a direction that I really don't feel comfortable with. We saw inaction by Morrison and the LNP in relation to the bushfires, then to the bungled vaccine rollout. And I thought, okay, but then as I'm talking to friends of mine, people I associate with, people I work with, it became very apparent that people are really suffering from income insecurity and making really tough decisions as to whether or not they should be paying for their food or paying for their pills. Parents who couldn't take their kids to the doctor on the day that they wanted to or needed to because of the defunding of our Medicare system. You would have all seen the ABC and other programs where we saw 8 people in aged care facilities getting substandard meals and not being cared for. And I thought, my goodness, these are uncaring policies. And as a result of that, the people of Brisbane are being left behind. And they're people I know, I'm sure they're people you know. And therefore I decided to put my hand up and be inside the tent, because at the end of the day, Australia deserves a better future, the people of Brisbane deserve a better future, and the only way we'll get that is if there's a change of government, because we need government who are going to put people back at the centre of decision making and who care about people and care about the outcomes, and that everybody is treated fairly.
Thank you, Madonna. And in terms of ABC, shout out to Dean and Toby, who are with us tonight. Dean, you're getting my good side? Thank you, Dean. To our final candidate on the couch tonight, Stephen Bates is here from the Queensland Greens. Make yourself known, Stephen. A big woo for Stephen from the balcony.
I get to go lucky last. My first moment I realised that everything is political, and that the decisions that people in power make have a genuine impact on the lives of everyday people, myself included, everyone here, was when I was living in the United States. And I was working for, I can say it, I was working for Disney. And they were there's whole other stories around there, but I was working for $7 an hour, the US federal minimum wage, while the company I worked for posted profits in excess of $100 billion every year. And I had this moment where I walked into the storeroom of where I was working, and one of my co-workers was on the ground physically crying, and I sort of thought, something's happened, someone said something horrible to you, tell me what's happening. And she said that she was having to decide between paying insulin or paying for her rent. And that is the direction that we're heading in this country. The mass privatization of all our services, the Americanization of our entire political system, policies that are written of, by, and for corporate donors instead of the people of this country. So we have parties sitting up here on this stage tonight that have taken over $11 million from giant corporations in the last decade, and they get policies written for them in exchange for that money. And that is the root cause, I think, of so many problems that we face. While we've been out door knocking in the community for, actually it'll be a year on May the 4th, so nice little celebration to come here. We've been out door knocking in the community for over a year, calling people at markets, letterboxing, absolutely everything we can to get our message out. And the key issue that people have is the complete inaction on climate change. Inaction on climate change, cost of living crisis, housing crisis, all these issues are just manifesting. They've been lying underground for so long, and COVID has just really brought them out into the forefront, and we can't ignore them anymore. And it all comes back to this political system that we have in this country that is just bought and paid for by billionaires and multinational corporations. And I personally think until we address that issue, getting money out of our democracy, we cannot possibly hope to tackle anything else. So that is why I put my hand up to run. On the night of the 2019 federal election, I sat on my couch with one of my friends and thought, I can't sit by any longer. I can't watch what is happening to this country after I just lived the experience in the United States. I can't sit by and let the same thing happen here to my friends, my family, and everyone else that I know, because we deserve better than that. We deserve politicians who actually represent the community's interests, who actually listen to people, who aren't bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry or giant corporations. That's what the people of this country need, and I hope to be that representative for us.
Thank you, Stephen. From Disneyland to Canberra, we've all got dreams.
Mickey Mouse is in both.
Oh, he says Mickey Mouse is in both. All right, so ladies and gents, we've got probably the next 10 minutes or so. I just want to get a sense from the candidates what they're hearing as they're out and about, door knocking, talking to people, pressing the flesh with 117,000 of you. But then we're going to have, is it Ken and Kat who are on mics in the audience tonight? And we'll get you to raise your hand in about 10 minutes' time. You'll be able to direct questions to the entire panel or individuals, as Ken said. Keep it tight. Make sure there's a question in there, and we'll try and get as much information back and forth tonight. But just on door knocking, you mentioned there, Stephen, you've been out and about. Trevor, you're on a phone box that I drive past every day on, is it Kelvin Grove Road? Maybe I was to get a little further out. But I know you're out and about a lot as well. What are you hearing from locals, and specifically on that issue of climate change, which has come up with a couple of other candidates tonight? As a member of the sitting government, you know that that's an issue that there is a sense the LNP has not done enough on. What are you hearing from people? I don't want to labour just climate change, but what else are people telling you is important to them?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I think one of the reasons that I put on the table to start with the idea of having a detailed local plan is this is a diverse electorate. It's a CBD electorate, and the demographics are diverse, and that means you get a huge variety of issues that come to the fore. Of course, issues around the environment, and that's not just emissions and climate change, it's local environment, it's biodiversity, it's recycling reforms, it's local environment and amenity issues such as the aircraft noise as well. It's cost of living has certainly raised its head over recent months or so, and flood recovery efforts have also been a significant issue post the recent floods. So all of those issues and more. I'm happy to talk specifically in relation to emissions and climate change. I mean, these were significant issues at the last election and the election before that as well. I think one of the big differences between those elections and now is that at this point in time, following a lot of hard work over the last year, Australia is now in lockstep with all of the other comparable countries around the world who have signed up to net zero by 2050 alongside pretty much every other country that we would compare ourselves to. But it's not just about targets. It's about actual achievements and runs on the board as well. So the 20+% reduction that we've seen in emissions is, of course, welcome, but we need to see more. And as a candidate, I'm the one who brings a detailed plan, both locally and nationally, to help achieve that emissions reduction. The work that I've been doing on recycling reforms, which, emissions from landfill and from food and organic waste, the methane emissions that are created from organics breaking down are one of the top 7 things that we measure in our national emissions reporting, and I'm the one who's got all the state governments and all the governments of Australia to sign up to halving food waste, which is going to see a reduction of emissions in the order of 3 to 4 million tonnes a year. That's the sort of thing that I can bring to the table as the candidate for Brisbane.
As the sitting member of Brisbane, though, and being a part of the incumbent government, of course, you have profile, you have recognition, you're an assistant minister as well. That brings with it the challenges of when there's infighting within your own family, right? So between Senator Matt Canavan, Colin Boyce, another candidate, this question over 2050 and whether there's a commitment there. I mean, truth be told, Senator Matt Canavan came on my program the other day and said his proudest achievement in the last 6 years in the Senate is getting the Adani coal mine approved. He'd love to see many more thermal coal mines across Queensland. It's not doing anything other than stating the obvious that goes against the kind of advice of every sort of credible economists and scientists. Does that damage your local campaign?
I think what I'd say is there's always going to be differences and divisions inside of every single political party, right? For there to be perfect representation, there'd need to be 25 million political parties for 25 million Australians, and there's not. Matt Canavan and others, they've made their views clear on this over a long time. I've probably, before I was promoted to an assistant minister, been on the front page of too many papers criticising some of the individual Nats around some of their suggestions that the federal government should be owning or operating coal-fired power stations before. That continues to be my view. The point I'd say is what they've come out with in recent days is consistent with what they've always held, but it's not the government's position. It's not our policy.
Okay. Is this a strong point for you, Stephen Bates, as the Greens candidate? Is this where you hope that people will be looking to vote for you?
Well, I know it's where people are going to be looking to vote for us because that's the overwhelming message we're hearing from people at the doors, at markets, and on the phone as well. And, it's interesting to say that you're an assistant minister and you have this position in the government, but the government has not changed their policy on anything that they've done in terms of emissions reduction. It's all well and good to say that, yes, there's internal divisions within every party, but the internal divisions in my political party, in the Greens, doesn't come down to what the science says. We all acknowledge what the IPCC report says, which is we need a 75% reduction in emissions by 2030, otherwise the planet's cooked. That's just the facts. And within the Greens, we have a science-backed plan that we're taking to the election. We want to invest in the local economy and the national economy, 100% publicly owned renewable energy by the end of the decade. And we acknowledge that in order to achieve these goals, we have to phase out thermal coal by 2030 and metallurgical coal by 2040 to keep in line with the science and what the experts are telling us.
The Resources Council would argue, how are you going to fund your roads, your hospitals? Look at what these industries also give back to the state. There's also, some pretty tough criticism levelled at the Greens in terms of what experience do you have in government, your economic credentials. Are you getting any pushback from people on that front as well?
It's a good question, and I think all of our plans are independently costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is the organisation that costs everyone's plans that's sitting up here. When it comes to the mining industry, we're not wanting to abolish mining. All we want to do is phase out thermal coal, metallurgical coal, and oil, our gas and oil that we use for fuel. It's the fossil fuels that we use to power our economy, which are the issue. And we 100% acknowledge that coal was the driving force behind the Industrial Revolution and behind the economic growth we've seen over the last century. But I'm sure people complained as well when the light bulb was invented and it usurped the need of the candle. It's the same situation that we're in now. The economy is shifting, the needs of the planet and the economy is shifting, and we have to be at the forefront of addressing this. Otherwise, we're just going to be left behind like we always seem to be in Australia, with the leftovers of the rest of the world that we're going to have to deal with. So I want to go back to your original question, which yes, we still want to keep mining. We'll need mining for rare earth metals to build the renewable infrastructure that we want to. But it's about making sure that those coal and gas companies actually pay their taxes. 1 in 3 of these giant companies in Australia don't contribute to the tax revenue of the country. And that means we get left behind in terms of healthcare, childcare, education. Them keeping all that money, which is from the resources that we all own. It's under the ground in this country. They're extracting wealth from us and not contributing back into our economy or our society. Okay,
and will it be for the public to decide on the associated jobs and the pace at which that change happens? Justin Knudson, if Clive Palmer was here tonight, he'd probably have a fair bit to say on this particular issue. But I want to go back to some of the things that you raised in your intro. As a small business person, you talked about freedoms and choice that you want to get back. What specifically are you referring to there?
Well, my experience, because we do run a hospitality business over the last couple of years, we've actually copped the brunt of most of the mandates. I think the outcome of that, I think the government jumped the gun a little bit too quickly on some of these mandates. And we weren't supported. There was some initiatives by the government, JobKeeper, to keep people in jobs. But it wasn't a good scheme, it wasn't a fair scheme. It upset the culture of most of the businesses that I've talked to, because we had people we had employees that were doing 4-6 hours a week who were getting $1,500 compared to our full-timers who were getting the same amount. So there seemed to be a fair bit of money that could have been used to better schools and childcare that could have been used to, and we're now stuck with a big debt because of that overspending, I believe. But I think the freedom of choice is the most important thing that we have in this day and age, and I felt that mandates took away that choice. I think the government overstepped its reach in our own sovereignty and our own ability to make our choices for ourselves and treated us like kids. And that had a big knock-on effect with business, and a lot of people, good qualified people, nurses, doctors, ambulance drivers, have lost their jobs because they have made their own choice to not follow the mandates, and I think that's had a massive impact on many people's lives.
Do you think there was a benefit to that in terms of the rates of illness, the rates of death, the broader impact on the economy?
What do you mean by that exactly?
Do you think by some of the decisions around vaccine mandates and those sorts of requirements and lockdowns, or the restrictions of freedom on people, also benefited the community and the country?
I think the disadvantages of it outweighed the benefits of it. I think there was more psychological problems. There was a lot of heartache with people not being able to see their relatives. We had a lot of Queenslanders not being able to even get home for months on end. And I think the kids suffered a lot with, being homeschooled. And that would have caused a lot of stress on parents as well. So I think with the suicide rates, the depression rates, the mental illness, the loss of jobs, the loss of incomes, had a bigger impact on most people's lives than the pandemic.
Okay, Justin, thank you. Madonna, are you door knocking a lot?
I've been out door knocking since July last year, and I've done thousands of doors, I can assure you, and worn out a few pairs of shoes.
Okay. What percentage of 117,000 have you knocked on? I mean, let's think. Are there most people 2 people, 3 people, 4 people in this neighbourhood? How many homes do you reckon you visited?
Yeah, a few thousand individual homes.
And what are they telling you?
Well, there's a few things, but can I actually just address the climate change issue, because that is something that's come up while I've been door knocking, and the fact, are we in box step with the rest of the world? I think that we've spent 10 years having a lost opportunity when it comes to climate change. And the reason I say that is because Labor has put forward a comprehensive plan to address climate change, and I get very excited about it. And the reason I do is because it covers everything from education to skills development to new jobs. Labor has a plan to build a whole economy for Australia built around renewables, sustainable industries. We're talking solar, we're talking wind, we're talking community batteries. In fact, if Labor gets in, there'll be a community battery here in the seat of Brisbane. In addition to that, it's about electric vehicles. But more importantly, to become a renewable economy, we need to unleash the investment potential that is just sitting in the wings out there. As I mentioned, I've been in the private sector now for the past 20 years, and I can tell you there are billions of dollars of investment just waiting to be unleashed here in Australia. And what business is looking for is security and certainty from government. So Labor has committed to invest in the infrastructure that's needed. Our electricity grid at the moment is not up to par in sustaining a sustainable economy built on renewables. Labor will invest in that, and that's why I get really excited, because can you imagine that we could have an economy built around renewables? What a lost opportunity for the last 10 years, and I'm very excited about that, and it's a really comprehensive plan, and you don't have to believe me. I won't say Google it, but go look it up.
Well, you worked for Deloitte Australia, and I did see some figures recently from Deloitte Economics suggesting, the jobs in renewables versus the jobs in fossil fuels. There's far more in renewables. But let me go to Tiana, because, you described yourself as an angry 18-year-old. These parties In 18 years, with someone who's switched on to the world and politics, none of them managed to convince you that their plans were right for your future?
Well, the Greens, yeah. But, yeah, but as I mentioned, the IPCC has warned us that if we don't address animal agriculture, we're still going to face the consequences of climate change. And so animal agriculture is responsible for more than half of all methane. And methane can be up to 200 times more destructive than CO2. And the animal agriculture industry also produces more greenhouse gases than the entire transport sector. So regardless, we need to address it because, deforestation, last year it was 93% of deforestation was caused by animal agriculture. All that was koala homes, and 98% of deforestation around the Great Barrier Reef catchment was from beef farming specifically. So regardless, we have to address it long term for sustainability. But yes, the Greens are pretty good on their climate policies.
All right, ladies and gents, you're starting to get a sense of who the candidates are, what they stand for. Again, what a great contest of ideas that you have, which is probably why your seat is so key. At the moment, Trevor Evans holds the seat of Brisbane on a margin of 4.9%. The ALP held it between 1980 and 2010, and Trevor's held the seat since 2016. What happens on May 21? That is up to you. What happens in the next 60 minutes or so? That's also up to you. Ken and Kat doing the rounds. Here she is. Kat up the front, Ken down the back. For some reason, AC/DC just started playing as well. What's happening? Raise your hands and jump up with a question. Sir, good evening.
Hi everyone, my name's Marcus. I'm one of the founding members of the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance. We are a local community group that is fighting Brisbane Airport, as well as excessive and unreasonable noise pollution. In this building, in fact, right in that corner on the very top, there is a government-owned and operated noise monitor. That monitor looks at the frequency as well as the volume of noise that comes from aircraft going over this area. The community that lives right around here in PHON, that is part of the seat of Brisbane, they were told that we would expect 0 flights. We were outside the noise contours for this area. Now compare this with out 150 flights a day that is supposed to increase up to 110 flights an hour.
Okay, Marcus,
Marcus,
I'll just jump in. Because if you want to run as a candidate, you got to register. What's your question?
The question is, we've heard from all the candidates now because we asked them about their commitments of what they're going to do. My question is the opposite. I want to actually understand what they believe caused this debacle that over 169 suburbs are affected now and people and families in there. So how come we are in this debacle? And what are we going to do to mitigate and address this? Because this problem is repeating itself in Western Sydney at Badgerry Creek Airport, the second airport in Sydney,
okay,
as well as the third runway.
Let's keep it tight. Trevor Evans, a quick response from you because you've recently announced some significant issues there.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Look, it has actually been a significant question for me. How did we get to this point? How did so many residents in Brisbane unexpectedly receive the unreasonable and excessive noise that they have from that second runway? And to the extent that I've been able to unpick that, the answer is that there's about 15 years worth of accumulated decisions, not by a single agency, but by a whole heap working together and holding hands. And so one of the big wins that we've had along the way to try to deal with this, to unpick it, to turn it around and to get a better result is to say that decision-making framework, no good. The culture of the agencies involved, whether that is the airport operators or the regulators, I don't think has been up to scratch. And so bringing in an entirely new body has made a very big difference, and you can tell that by the strength of the decision-making of that new body. We're not there yet in terms of landing all of the recommendations for change that they've made, but I'm much more positive about this than I was about a year ago.
But the flight paths will change under your plan. Madonna?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on that. When I became the candidate almost a year ago now, I've met with Marcus and people from the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance on several occasions, and I've also spoken to a number of people in our community. Post that, I went to Catherine King's office and asked whether or not we could have a community forum where we could get the voices of our community together to kickstart a discussion around not just looking at the past and what went wrong, but really looking at how we can come up with solutions. And I can tell you, to deal with aircraft noise here in Brisbane, what Labor is committed to is making that community forum permanent, which is different to others on the chairs up here. It'll be permanent, it will have teeth, it will report into the minister, and it will be properly funded so that the experts and others can be brought in to help make the decisions that need to be made to correct the problems that we're facing at the moment. That's one. The second thing is that what Labor is also committed to doing is reviewing the aircraft regulatory infrastructure. And that's pretty important, because one of the first things I noticed when I started looking into this was the Noise Ombudsman reports into the ASA, which is the regulator, and I think in most people's books, that's not best practice. So Catherine King has committed to initiating that review as soon as Labor gets elected, should we be fortunate to do so. And I think this is really important because, A, we need to fix the regulatory infrastructure problem, but we also need to have the community and experts come in and explain why things are the way they are and what can be done differently. And the TRACS report came out very, very recently, and what Labor has said in relation to the TRACS report is that they'll take on board any of those recommendations that will reduce the noise over our communities, and which can be done so safely. But there's a lot of discussions to happen yet, but we'll be at the forefront of that and be a part of that discussion with you.
Okay, Marcus, I hope you're pleased. You're getting a big response from both. I just want to get a quick response from you, Stephen, on that, and then we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, sure. I've been working with the Brisbane Flypath Community Alliance for well over a year now. Like Marcus said, you already sort of know our solutions. What we're proposing as the Greens, and what we've already actually tabled in Parliament, is a bill that would bring in line Brisbane Airport into the same standards that we see with airports around the rest of the country and around the world as well. So we're looking at introducing a curfew, the same as Sydney Airport has, between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. We're also looking at introducing flight movement caps, the exact same as Sydney Airport has, as well as LAX in California. So these are standards that already exist around the world and around the country. But I think the sort of root cause of this problem, again, sort of loops back to what I was talking about at the beginning. We have our democratic systems and institutions that are just bought and paid for by the relevant industries. So in the example of Brisbane Airport, we have the aviation industry that has donated tens of thousands of dollars every single year to both state and federal parties on both sides of the aisle. So it guarantees them the right decision, no matter which person is in government. And that's why I think we need independent voices, like Greens voices in Parliament, who don't take corporate donations, who aren't accountable to their donors and the vested interests, and are actually just accountable to the community and will fight for the community.
Okay. It's probably some aviation workers who live in the seat of Brisbane as well, so it's not always just an other and us and them. But here we go. Kat, who have you got? It's very dark. Hello. Hang on, we can't hear you. I could see your excellent hair, though. Hello, it's me. Ken, we've got a problem. Houston, let's swap microphones. Candidates karaoke. Oh, here we go. That was worth waiting for. Good evening.
Hi candidates, my name's Tom. I'd just like to know, given that ScoMo let us down last election with his promise about implementing a federal ICAC, I'd just like to know where the candidates stand implementing a federal ICAC going forward.
Justin.
Yeah, that's a cracker.
Try that mic next to you.
Hello?
Hello, hello.
No. Hello?
Hey, we're back. Yep.
The UAP will definitely be putting forth immediately to have a federal ICAC put in place to hold all federal agencies accountable.
Madonna, Scott Morrison says there's a plan there. It's your team that's holding things up.
Labor, whoops. I do have the name, but I don't sing. Here we go. Look, Labor will definitely implement a federal ICAC. Every state government has an ICAC that holds their governments to accountable. The feds are the only government without one. Labor will definitely implement it. It will be implemented before Christmas. It will have the teeth and it will be robust. At the end of the day, I really do believe it doesn't matter which side of politics you sit on, government has to be accountable. Labor believes that, and it will be implemented by Christmas.
Stephen, the Greens have been arguing strongly for this. Do you believe either the LNP or Labor will deliver an independent commission against corruption?
I believe Labor will, with the support of the Greens as well. Senator Larissa Waters' Greens bill establishing a federal ICAC actually passed through the Senate with the support of Labor years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, and it's been sitting before the House of Representatives because people like Barnaby Joyce go around on, I think it was the ABC, and said, if we had a federal ICAC, I'd be scared to do my job. And I say, it's funny, but it shouldn't be funny. That's terrifying. And I think politicians should be scared to do their jobs. They should be terrified of people in the room. They should be scared of the community because the people are the ones that should have the power, not the vested interest. And I know I keep talking about corporate donations, but that has to be paired with a federal ICAC. If we are to get real accountability back in politics, we need that federal ICAC. We need it to be retrospective. We need it to have teeth. And we have to get the vested interests out of our political system so that, again, our politicians are only accountable to you and me and everyone else in the country.
Tiana, it's a slightly bigger philosophical question, but do you trust politicians?
Oh, well, I know the New Zealand politicians seem nice, but you seem nice too, you guys, yeah. Yeah, I recently did some sort of quiz called Vote Campus. It's like, how trustworthy do you think ScoMo is? No. How trustworthy do you think Albo is? No. But yes, the Animal Justice Party also wants to introduce an ICAC as well as a federal animal protection body. Because at the moment, the agricultural minister, who's like pro-puppy farming, pro-greyhound racing, pro-battery cages, gets to make all the decisions about how we treat animals and protect them under the law. And that's just inappropriate because, you know, he's getting all that money from the animal agriculture industry and they just want to treat animals the cheapest way possible. So.
Trevor Evans, why don't we have a federal ICAC?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So, just to put it on record, I'm a strong supporter of many pro-integrity measures, including the introduction of an ICAC. And the commission model that's been worked up by the government is, it's pretty detailed. It's about 300 and something pages. It's been tabled in the Parliament. And more than that, there's $60 million that's been put aside in the budget for the budget year ahead, on the basis that we do expect to have an ICAC in place in this budget year. Now, it's worth talking about the detail of what an ICAC is and what it looks like, because the question does come up from time to time, is it going to look and feel exactly like a state ICAC body like we have in New South Wales or in Queensland or similar? The detailed model that's been worked up, that's gone through the engagement and consultation processes with the law reform bodies and others, I would say is probably closest to the Victorian state model. Not exactly the same, but probably closest to the Victorian state model. A federal model is always going to look a little bit different because the corruption and integrity issues at a federal level are different to state. State bodies deal with state governments and councils who are very close to planning decisions, developments, DAs. Those are things that the federal government isn't particularly close to. But I guess the other reason that it's important to think about whether this model is closer to the Victorian versus other models comes to the other side of what we're trying to achieve here, justice, right? And some of the models that are out there at a state level have led to some pretty unjust outcomes, which are pretty scary. In New South Wales and Queensland, for instance, we've got instances like Margaret Cunneen, who was put through the ringer publicly, was never actually charged, had her career trashed. Here in Queensland right now, we have a number of mayors and councillors who essentially had a shadow put over them for more than an entire political cycle, essentially ending their careers. And at the end of those investigations, absolutely no charges have been laid, absolutely no progress has been made. And so I guess the opportunity here is for us to look very carefully at those lessons to make sure that we are achieving justice. And that's why the federal model that's been worked up and is on the table is close to the Victorian one.
And you're probably getting a sense that people are pretty keen on that. So in the next financial year, calendar year?
Yeah, just to be clear here, so, you know...
Well, I think, but people do want... I mean, this is not a new concept. It's been talked about. Of course, it needs to be robust and just.
Yep.
I think
So
voters are saying
timing.
when.
To timing. Okay, so I would say that the reason that, you know, the full bill was tabled, I think late last year or early this year in the Parliament. And the reason, quite frankly, that it hasn't been passed is there is a huge opportunity for politicking here, which has meant that the opposition parties, who between them do control the numbers in the Senate, said that they just wouldn't pass it. What I would say is that the model that's been put forward by the government...
Let's hear him.
The model that's been put forward by the government is the only detailed, worked-up model on the table. And here's my prediction. After the election, whoever is in Parliament will be passing something that looks and feels very, very much like the government model that's on the table.
Okay, very briefly, and let's move on.
I think Trevor just proved that you can have 300 pages and say nothing but bullshit in it. And one more thing. That $60 million has been in previous federal budgets for about 9 years and never been used. So it can be done, they just don't want to do it.
Okay, let's go back to questions.
Can I just comment?
We'll move on. Ken?
My question is for Trevor. You've been the Assistant Minister for Recycling for 3 years. What have you achieved?
Yeah, thanks, John. I guess in the recycling space, what we've seen is, for the first time ever, the federal government stepping up to try to make a difference when it comes to bringing in a more circular economy. This has traditionally been an area that's been the responsibility of states and territories, and many of them have devolved that down to local councils. Before I was appointed, what was the situation in the headlines? Well, the situation was stories about Australia's waste streams, our potential recycling being sent to other countries around our region. It was a story of the residents in Ipswich and other councils in Victoria and other places learning that their recycling bins were going into landfill right alongside their general rubbish. It was a story of truckloads upon truckloads of waste being shipped across state boundaries to take advantage of the differences between state waste levies and so on. So what have I done? I've got all the states and territories together on one page to create a national waste policy, driving circular economy outcomes with targets in every single area that you'd expect to see them. Decreasing landfill, increasing recycling, dealing with packaging, dealing with food waste, and so on. I've created the first plastics plan. I wrote Australia's first national recycling laws, which put an end to Australia's waste streams going offshore. And with a new fund that we've created at the federal level, matched by the states and territories, there's now $1 billion of new recycling infrastructure and facilities being built in every state and territory around Australia right now. That's good for the environment, it's good for the economy, and it's also great, actually, in recent times post-COVID, to think about our supply chain security and our sovereignty, because all of those plastics, all of that aluminium, all that paper and cardboard pulp, that can be used by great Aussie businesses to make the next generation of products here in Australia.
Let's keep skipping along. Next question. Hello, sir.
I'm on, yes, very good. Frank Hills. Just first an observation that tonight's event is apparently officially part of the Brisbane Comedy Festival, hence the plastic cups we all have. On climate change, it seems to me that part of the problem is that there's no legal requirement on any of the countries in the world, out of the Paris Accord and maybe some of the others subsequently, to do what they say that they sign up to. And things like Britain pausing their process to net zero, Germany building more coal-fired power plants, China the other day, probably 6 months ago, is saying that they need to pause because out of their electricity crisis some months before, that people's jobs and the economy were actually more important to China. So how is it going to happen if the countries of the world are not signed up in a legal way to do what they say they do, but all of them don't do it.
Madonna, I'll go to you and then Justin.
I think what you're talking, the issue that you're talking about is the world is heating up. We're cooking. There is no question about that. And every country has a responsibility to do something about it. Australia, we can control what we can do here. And frankly, all that's happened over the last 10 years is there's been lip service paid to climate change. At the moment, there are divisions within the LNP. They can't decide whether net zero's in, it's dead, it's flexible, etc. So honestly, I don't understand how anyone could even trust the LNP when it comes to climate change policy. So at the end of the day, no, we're having a robust discussion about ideas here. Labor's ideas for climate change are robust. They cover everything from education to skills development to new industries, and we should be excited about that as a nation, and we should be doing everything we can to go down the renewable energy path.
Justin from United Australia Party.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, I'm pretty new to this whole politics game, so I've been doing a lot of study on a lot of different things and aspects of what we're going to get questions asked about, and climate certainly is a big one for all. By the reactions here tonight, it's on top of your mind, most people, is that correct? No. It's a difficult one because there's a lot of aspects to it. The push for renewables, and Steve and the guys have said a lot of good things tonight about renewable power, but there's also the cost to produce those renewable systems, and not just the cost in monetary terms, but the cost in mining and producing, all the things that go into that. And at the end of the day, as far as the international agreements are concerned, people are going to be people, and once the lights go off and they're affected, that's going to be on the top of their minds, unfortunately.
Why are the lights going off?
Well, I just saying, obviously, if different countries are not agreeing to the agreements, like Frank said, it's because that other priorities start to get to the top of the pile, and that's when these agreements break down. So as far as getting everybody on an international plane to all do the same thing, I think that's going to be very difficult, and that comes under following a very stringent foreign policy. But I don't know, China are tough on, and they're building a lot of coal-fired power plants at the moment, so, as well as India. So they've got a big population, and at the end of the day, I mean, I can barely tell my 16-year-old son what to do, but good luck telling China. So mate, at the end of the day, I think it's a tough call. It's almost fantasy land that everybody's going to stick to the same thing because of human nature and everybody's different political ideas on this. It's a great idea, but whether it can be achieved, mate, I don't know.
All right, I'm going to move on because I think we've talked a little bit about that with both Tiana and Stephen. Yes, gentleman up the back. Hello.
Hello. My name is Brian. I'm a young voter, 23, a nurse working in mental health, and I just moved to New Farm 2 weeks ago. And where I was in my previous electorate, I was on track to vote Greens, my second federal election. But when I Googled the candidate, Stephen Bates, and looked at his seeming lack of academic and political experience, I was concerned. Is there anything you can say, Stephen, to reassure me you have the background, experience, and knowledge to represent my new electorate, not just as a member of the Greens Party, but yourself as an individual as well? Can I say I felt a lot more confident since this debate?
Never underestimate the retail boy. That's what I'll say. Just because I have a working class job doesn't mean I'm stupid. Just because I'm 29 doesn't mean I'm ignorant. I have a bachelor's degree of social science from the University of Queensland, and I majored in social and public policy. I studied policies from around the world, especially my favorite, it's probably a surprise to no one, the Scandinavian countries, how their economies are structured, how their social services are structured, their public services are structured. I could talk you into the night about that, but I won't do that. But it's also just about, I actually live the consequences of what happens of government decisions. I make $55,000 a year. Everyone I work with is in the same situation. When income support is cut, it affects my family, it affects my friends. When higher education gets more and more expensive because of cuts to that sector, that affects my circle, it affects me. The decisions that governments make aren't some abstract, faraway thing that I don't know anything about. They impact me in my daily life, they impact everyone I know in their daily lives. I definitely have the academic background to be able to sit up here and do this. I like to think that a lot of people have underestimated me because of my age and my job, and I fully expected that coming into politics. But I have the confidence, I have the skills, I have the ability. I don't always necessarily think you must have the education, but I have the education as well. And I think Parliament needs to actually reflect Australia. And Australia is not a bunch of 60-year-old, white, highly educated lawyers. It is retail staff. It is miners. It is tradespeople. It is academics. It is engineers. It is all of us. We do support the Uluru Statement.
Plot twist at the end there. All right, we might come to the Uluru Statement. Tiana's got a joke, guys.
So I may look like a child, but at least I don't act like the PM as a child.
Okay. It is the comedy festival. And of course, we already know of retail backgrounds and retail representation, so I hope that no one would underestimate the retail boy. Yes, Ken. Kat, hello.
Hi, my name's Lee. So, over recent years, the LGBT community have endured the nation's gaze through the marriage equality debate and more recently the Religious Discrimination Act, and increasingly more the trans community. I want to know what the panellists' commitments are to ensuring trans rights are human rights.
Very good. Trevor Evans.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. I'm a strong supporter of trans rights, just as I'm a strong supporter of our broader LGBT community here in Brisbane.
I just want to jump in. Everyone's fronted up here tonight. We want to hear everyone's responses, so we expect the same kind of respect back and forth.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Look, I feel a special responsibility as well in relation to LGBT rights. I am, of course, the first openly gay MP and LGBT MP that there has been in Queensland at either a federal or a state level. And, I'll take, I think, an interjection or two that I heard then speaking over me in relation to some of the recent voting around some of the legal changes with the RDA and the Sex Discrimination Act. And I just want to say, sure, I've been attacked in a few different ways and from a few different angles from my political opponents. I cop that. I know that the game that I'm in. But to be clear, those attacks are absolutely rubbish. What was on the table, on the Parliament, on that night was two different packages, and both of them aimed to progress, not regress, to progress the rights of the LGBT community. The package of reforms that I voted for would have seen the ending of the ability to expel kids on the basis of their sexuality immediately and on the basis of being trans within 6 months, and accompanied by a funding and support package that would have seen new resources for trans kids, for their families and for schools to manage those legal changes. What the alternative package wasn't accompanied by any resources or funding. It was a promise to be able to stop the expulsion of both gay and trans kids immediately. Me and others had our concerns about the drafting of that, and ultimately that second package, not the one I supported, but that second package was the one that got up. It was hastily drafted in the end, and what that meant is when the lawyers looked at it and the Senate looked at it the next day, it was scrapped immediately and didn't proceed. And what that means is that, the real detailed work that I and others had done to try to get some good, sensible reforms through were sadly defeated. In this space, like in so many others, it's great to have good intentions, but you've also got to be able to follow it up with good policy work and good legal work. And, you can never, in this game, let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Trevor, and again, I'm conscious of the fact that, with profile comes great criticism as well. The situation in the seat of Warringah with the Liberal candidate there who's been endorsed by Scott Morrison and her views quite clearly by the trans community have been described as transphobic. You live in an inner city progressive, diverse seat who've made clear their respect for diverse communities. Does that situation hurt your chance in this seat?
Well, look, I guess I'd say I am, given my background and given my seat and everything, deeply concerned around the politicisation of trans issues. And, firstly, that's because so many members of our trans community here, they deserve dignity and our respect, and some of them have significant challenges and need our strong support. Secondly, when I talk to members of our trans community here in Brisbane, they talk to me about their priorities that they want government to be focused on. And that's about support services, and it's about health services, and it's about, well, in the case of state governments, legal documentation, identity reforms and harmonisation, all of those things. The issue about trans and sport, for me, involves a significant threshold question which has not been satisfactorily answered for me. And that is, what is the case for government intervention in a situation where at the moment it is the non-government community organisation sector which is dealing with those issues, and I've got to say, dealing with them pretty respectfully and well. All of the local cases and stories that I know from around Brisbane, whether they involved community organisations, sports, schools, gendered organisations like the Girl Guides or Men's Shed, they're dealing with these things very well. I'm not seeing a systemic issue there that justifies a government intervention. And that makes it very different to the marriage equality debate. There was a law there on the statute books which entrenched discrimination against the LGBT community. On that basis, intervention was well and truly warranted. In this case, I'm not convinced.
Madonna, perhaps a response from you, because it's likely that the alternative Prime Minister in this situation is Anthony Albanese, who is in COVID isolation still at the moment, so probably hasn't been questioned as robustly on this specific issue. Where does the Labor Party stand when it comes to trans rights?
Yeah, well, so when I kicked off Who Am I earlier today, what I said was I believe in fairness and treating people with respect, treating people fairly, and the values of the Labor Party are the values that I share. So that's the bottom line. We need to treat people fairly. But let me get on to the issue of the trans debate. Frankly, I was very upset when I saw the discussion kick off, because I've been knocking on doors, and as important as it is to have robust discussions around how we can be more inclusive and more respectful of every person in our community, including our trans community, this was not coming up. This was an issue that was raised for politicisation, and vulnerable people have been politicised and dragged through discussions that frankly are very, very hurtful. And in relation to, and the religious discrimination debate was an example of this. That debate went forward for political gain, and when the political gain was lost, that bill was tabled. And look, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have discussions around inclusiveness and how we should be respectful and the rights and protections that we should have around every person in our community, in particular the vulnerable, and in particular our trans and LGBTIQ+. But what we shouldn't be having are fake debates to rile people against each other for political gain. That's just wrong, and it's part of the reason people have lost trust in government.
Hello, up the back.
Hi, how's it going? My question is for the Liberal and Labor candidates. When I think of Labor's records, I think of Medicare, superannuation, Gonski, NDIS, best economic managers on the planet. My question is on the records of the major parties, particularly to Trevor, but also I'd like to hear Madonna's answer on the strength of your records and what are some of the big changes that have made this country better over your reign in the last 100 years, basically.
Okay. We need a new term in politics, because that was like a Dorothy Dixer, but then also a super opportunity for you, Trevor, because the economy is the grounds on which the Prime Minister would like this election to be fought on.
Yeah, I mean, that's an extraordinarily broad question. I almost don't know where to start with it, other than to say, I guess, at the end of the day, here we are in 2022, 122 years since the Federation of Australia was created. And in spite of all of the challenges, recent and historical, that Australia has been through, pandemics, depressions, world wars and so on, we know in our hearts that so many people around the world wish that they were here in Australia and in our shoes. And I've got to say, over the majority of those years, particularly post-war, it's been the Liberal Party in majority government as we've stewarded Australia through those. Every single day that I'm in the Parliament in Canberra, I make sure that I remember and remind myself how special it is and what an honour it is to be there. And I do that by doing something that you don't have to do, but you can. I turn up for the opening remarks, the ceremonies, the prayers that happen at the start of every single day. And that's my moment to reflect on that place. And as I said in my maiden speech, the first time I stood up in that huge cavernous room, I reflect on so many amazing generations of decision makers and leaders that had come before me that had managed to steward Australia through all of those challenges over the last 120 something years. And I consider that I'm walking in the shoes and the footsteps of some amazing people. And I think in time, when historians, when economists and others reflect on even just the challenges of the last few years in terms of natural disasters and COVID and the pandemic and the global recession, they will compare how Australia has fared compared to almost any other country around the world, and they'll draw some pretty positive conclusions. And I'm very proud to have been a part of that.
Thank you, Trevor. Madonna.
So I'll respond first talking about the economy to start off with, and then achievements and what you can expect under Labor, which has some very progressive policies going forward should we be elected. So let's look at the reality. This government has spent more, borrowed more, taxed more than any Labor government. We're $1 trillion in debt and nothing to show for it. Under the LNP, our debt doubled even before the pandemic. So they're the facts. Wages growth, these are indications of economic growth, right? Wages growth, investment growth, productivity growth have all been poorer under the LNP than any previous Labor government. That's the facts. We might have 4% unemployment, but I can tell you behind every one of those unemployment figures is a person. And there are millions and millions of people who are unemployed, not unemployed, underemployed, and are making those really tough decisions every day as to whether or not they can buy their food or whether or not they can buy their pills. So that's the reality in terms of the economy. Let's talk about big progressive changes. In Australia, Labor has implemented some of the most progressive social support changes and evolutions, institutions, whatever you want to call them, to look after and create fairness in our society. Universal access to healthcare, Medicare. NDIS to support the most vulnerable people who are in need. Superannuation so that people can retire in dignity into old age. And not to mention the national apology. Going forward under Labor, we will implement in full the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We will make sure that there is a referendum to give our First Nations people a voice in Parliament. This is really important for the future of our country and the future of ourselves as a society. The other thing Labor will do is securely fund the Makarrata Commission, which will obviously move forward in terms of bringing us all closer together under, as not just the First Nations people, but people who share different cultures and live and walk our earth here in Australia. Labor will also, as we said before, introduce an ICAC, which is greatly needed to hold government accountable. These are some significant reforms that will happen under Labor.
Thank you both. On Kat's side of things. Hello.
Hi, my name's Yasmin. I'm interested in the health of Australians, and I'm interested to hear a little bit about the expansion of the listing of medications. Maybe Trevor can address that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that question. It is an important topic, and I think over the life of our government, we've seen close to 3,000 new or amended listings of medicines in that time, and our government, through our economic management's been able to make a commitment to the Australian people that wasn't able to be met by past governments when they mismanaged the finances, and that was when the PBAC recommends a new medication, we will ensure that it is funded and listed. A previous government had notes in their budget paper to say that they wouldn't be able to do that anymore. We have managed to maintain that commitment. I'll give you a really good example actually of what that means for our local community. Folks may or may not know that here in Brisbane we have more people living with cystic fibrosis than most other areas around Australia, and that's because they move here for the better weather and the cleaner air and the climate and so on. When I was elected, the average life expectancy of somebody living with cystic fibrosis was 34 years old. And that struck a chord with me because that's basically the age that I was at the same time. I've worked very closely with the cystic fibrosis here in Queensland, and there's some amazing local people and advocates that I've been working with. We've been able to lift some incredibly expensive but life-changing and life-saving medications like Kalydeco and most recently like Trikafta. And right now, at this point in time, the life expectancy for somebody living with cystic fibrosis is closer to 50 years. And I'm incredibly proud to have changed their lives in that way and to have been a part of it.
Madonna, I'm going to go back to you on that because that is a criticism that has been consistently levelled at Labor, that in the past, Labor governments haven't managed the economy as well, and therefore that's had an impact on medications able to be listed. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, I think my previous response answered the question about the economy. Okay, so we'll leave that at there. In terms of PBS, Labor at this point has not announced its headline policies in relation to PBS, so I won't be able to go into those in any depth. But what I can tell you from the stories of people that I meet every single day, a lot of people are finding it very difficult to pay for their pills. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're on endocrine pills, and there's a whole lot of those heart control pills, blood pressure pills, etc. People are really struggling. So this is a big ticket item that's hurting the hip pockets of Australians, and that's why Labor's plan not only will look at addressing things like the PBS system, but you have to look holistically at how can we bring down cost of living for people? How can we make it easy for people to actually have the income that they need? And that's why Labor's going to fight for fairer wages, increase wages in the care work sector, for instance, bring down costs of living around childcare, making childcare cheaper, bringing down electricity bills, making access to bulk billing easier for people. These are big, big ticket items. And so you can't just look at it and go, well, what are we doing about PBS? We have to look at it as the policies of government affect individuals holistically and really work on each one of those. More to come on PBS.
Okay. Just very quickly, Justin, before we move on to the next question, as a small business owner, now as a member of United Australia Party, I mean, both major parties will spruik their economic credentials. Probably argue the Greens would criticise both. From your perspective, which major party do you think manages the economy better?
Neither of them. Well, we are in $1.4 trillion worth of debt, which is unprecedented in Australia's history. And that level of debt is certainly going to push forward inflation and the rise in interest rates. And as I stated at the beginning, that is a big topic for the people that I'm talking to. So I think having a backbone in UAP headed by somebody like Clive Palmer, whether you like him or not, he's been able to make billions of dollars from nothing, and he's a pretty astute businessman. I think we've got a pretty qualified team amongst other people like Dominic Martinello, who headed Deloitte's in Sydney for 20 years, to make good economic and sound policy based on good business models.
Rebecca, can I just say something about debt? There's been a few figures bandied around tonight which I just don't think are right. So just to confirm, the federal government's total accumulated debt at the moment is sitting at a little bit over 800 billion. Okay, and let's talk about what that's comprised of when it was accumulated and what happened. So obviously at the end of the Howard years, the government was in surplus and we didn't have accumulated debt. What happened in the Gillard-Rudd years was that debt was accumulated firstly in response to the GFC, but then structural spending was baked in, and what that meant was the deficits climbed. You know, these numbers aren't exactly right, but 10 billion to 20 billion deficit to 30 billion to 40 billion. What happened once there was a change of government is that debt direction was turned around. So instead of going up, by that much a year, it started to come down, 40, back to 30, back to 20, back to 10, and back to about 0. And so the debt that was accumulated on the way up did equal the debt that was accumulated on the way down. That's true. And just before the pandemic started, we'd had a budget outcome which was still a deficit, yes, but rounded to about 0.0% of GDP. And going into the year 2020 that involved COVID, I can tell you right now that the Treasurer was working on a significant surplus budget. What we've done in terms of our COVID response, in terms of JobKeeper, in terms of the cash flow boost and other measures like that, yeah, it's unprecedented. And it was expensive. And it worked. When I was going to sleep 2 years ago, the thing that was keeping my eyes awake and my eyes open and me awake was the idea that unemployment would reach those double-digit figures, that we would see 1 million Australians are reaching, by about now, notions of long-term unemployment. And instead what happened? With JobKeeper and cash flow boost, 11,000 local businesses here in Brisbane were saved. And close to 30,000 people, whether they were workers or sole traders or small business people, they managed to get income support through that period of time. And what that means is, instead of right now having hundreds of thousands or 1 million Australians approaching notions of long-term unemployment, we actually have the reverse. Small businesses, when I go and talk to them at the moment, say they can't find enough people and skills to grow really quickly. And so all of those hundreds of thousands of people are in the workforce. They're productive, they're paying taxes and contributing to the federal government's budget and not drawing down on welfare. And that's why we've seen in the last budget just handed down the biggest budgetary turnaround in 70 years in Australia's history.
Tiana?
So speaking of budget, I don't know if everyone knows this, but 75% of the regulatory cost for live export is paid by us. We're paying for live export. So what is you guys' policies on ending live export if you're funding that, making us pay for live export?
A question from the candidate. Stephen, do you have a policy around live exports?
Yeah, we do. So the Greens want to end live export. It was disappointing to see recently the federal government reverse their position on exporting live animals to the Northern Hemisphere during Middle Eastern summer. So these are ships that basically are 50, 60 degrees and just turn into floating ovens. So our policy is to end live export, yeah. I don't know if I can make it clearer.
I might just get a quick response from each of you on that. Justin, you don't have a specific view or policy on that? Yep.
Oh, look, I think any animal cruelty in doing that is abhorrent, so we'd be certainly looking at... I don't know the UAP's policy on that specifically, but personally I would be dead against it as well, so I'd agree with these guys.
Appreciate that. Madonna?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be with Tiana on this, but I think, at the moment Labor does support, or should I say, live exports are part of our economic mix and activities at this point in time. As to whether or not Labor will be changing its or announcing its policies around that, more to come on that. I don't have the answer tonight, and I won't sit here and lie to you, that's for sure. But I also do want to say one thing. When it comes to the economy, please just look at the facts. Please look at where the facts around wages growth, investment growth, when debt happened, when it didn't happen, the facts are there. And also, don't forget, when the LNP came to power, they promised us a surplus every single budget. And yes, it's been difficult during COVID, but even in the lead up to that, not one surplus, okay? So they're the facts, and please look them up.
Okay. Very briefly, Trevor, just on live exports, to answer Tiana's question.
Yeah, well, thank you. This was an issue that was pretty significant in the news, I think around the time or maybe just before my first election. There were a lot of stories along the ones that Stephen referred to. The Parliament did a fair bit of work in relation to that, and as far as I'm aware, we haven't seen those sorts of stories arising since then. When it comes to the broader issue, though, of animal cruelty, I've worked very closely with the meeting of environment ministers, states and territories to do a number of things. My priority has been around stopping the cruelty and the mistreatment of native wildlife, so we've seen some work to harmonise the penalties for that amongst the different states. We've seen Australia sign up to much better, stronger laws against the ivory trade, and we've also seen, just very recently, the banning of what's known as the opera house traps that fishermen used to use in local creeks and things, which used to cause the drowning of platypus. So those are all animal cruelty measures that I've been very pleased to have a hand in executing.
Hello. Hi, I'm Karen Benson. I've lived in this electorate, Brisbane, for most of my life, and I think one of the things we like about it is that it has been really diverse. But that's changing because there's not access to safe, secure, affordable housing. So I have a friend who lived in a rental for over 20 years and recently got kicked out. He's part of the fabric of this community but really struggled to stay in this community because of lack of housing affordability. So I'm interested if any of you have a big concrete idea about how you're going to bring housing affordability to this community.
Thank you, Karen. Stephen, have you got a big concrete idea?
Oh, we got a big concrete idea. I don't know if concrete idea is a pun that you meant to make, but so our plan as the Greens is to build 1 million public homes over the next 2 decades. So what that means is people get more access to the housing that they need. And part of our policy to localise it to Brisbane is to build 109,000 of those within the Brisbane local government area and exactly where people need it. Something that does concern me as well with housing is the practice of rental bidding that start to emerge, which is coming up from down south, and we have no laws in place to stop that from happening. So for those people who don't know, it's say you go to an open house for a rental, so the price that it's listed at might be $500 a week, and people will start bidding, making it higher and higher and higher. This then of course has market impacts because it increases the rate of rent for everyone, and as we know, people's wages are not keeping up with that at the moment. So it's becoming this systemic issue, and it's because housing is seen as a speculative commodity and not as an actual place where people, well, as the right that it should be for shelter. So yeah, part of our plan is to build those 1 million public homes, to have 125 of those as public, universally accessible rental properties as well, and to have 125 of those as shared equity homes, so that people can buy them for cheaper, build up equity instead of paying off a mortgage to the bank, sell it back to the government and move on and buy their own property.
Just on buying own properties, Justin, you raised the big yellow billboard that says 3% cap on home loan interest rates. Can a political party introduce a cap like that?
Well, that's a question. Is that working?
So the recycling's just going out. Do you organise that, Trevor?
Thanks,
Sorry,
Trev.
go ahead. Just talk us through the kind of the logic and how that might play out.
Well, the guys have been looking into the Menzies.
It's been a big night at the
I think
Powerhouse.
Trev's making this intentional on me.
Resource recovery, it's worth.
Resource recovery, that's money.
Look, the Constitution allows for the parliamentary to act the legislation to control the maximum of the 3%. That's coming down from the team. I personally am not 100%. We haven't been released the exact details how they're going to enact that. However, they wouldn't be releasing that kind of policy unless it was thoroughly vetted and being able to be shown as a practical thing. Housing affordability is a big issue. The rental, I mean, I see the guys going for open homes for rentals, and there's 30, 50 couples vying for housing, and also particularly after the floods, I had quite a lot of calls about distressed people who were out of their homes, who weren't able to find suitable accommodation. But it was brought to me that there was a lot of vacant accommodation in the public sector as well, a lot of empty flats. But certainly we are developing a policy on the public housing affordability thing, which will be released. But we are going to focus on keeping people in their own homes. So we're offering a the first $30,000 payable on a home loan will be tax deductible for all the Australian residents, and also we're offering a zonal taxation reduction of 20% on tax for people who live outside 200 kilometres of a capital city. So that might encourage families and businesses to move out of the capital cities a little bit more with those incentives where there's infrastructure in place, where it is cheaper to buy a house, and actually free up a little bit of the pressure that is on the city environment for housing at the moment as well. So if the more people we can move out into our regional areas, which, as I said, have got a lot of inbuilt infrastructure already, and give them good incentives to do that, that will be one of the other factors that might take a little bit of pressure off the housing market.
Just FYI, Quilpy's selling blocks of land for about 45 grand a pop, if anyone's interested in tree change. Madonna, Labor, on housing affordability, what can you do?
Okay, so to put this into perspective, we know that a third of Australians own their home, a third of Australians are paying off their home, and a third of Australians are renting. So we're looking at housing affordability in that context. Labor is addressing housing affordability from two perspectives. One is the ability to actually buy a home, and I'll get into that in a minute. And the other one then is obviously increasing supply to make housing more affordable. So let's look at it from the housing supply side. Under Labor will build, and by the way, this is a $10 billion housing future fund that has been fully costed. And there seems to be quite a significant number of houses being promised by others up on the panel here, and I'd be interested in the costings on those. But having said that, Labor has committed to building 20,000 affordable homes or social housing. 4,000 of those will go to women fleeing domestic violence, because we know there's an incredible shortage in that space. But also one of the greatest populations that are really at threat of becoming homeless are women over the age of 50. So those houses will be targeted at those vulnerable people. In addition, Labor has said it will build another 10,000 social and affordable homes for our frontline workers. And we know that many of our frontline workers are some of the most poorly paid workers in the country, and they've got us through COVID, and thank goodness for that. So looking at it from the supply side, Labor is committed to building more. Labor has also said that they will support the deposit guarantee for those trying to get into the home market, and I suspect we'll probably hear a little bit more on that going forward. But on the ability to pay, and I'm not going to go into this in depth because I've talked about this before, it really is, we have to address cost of living. We have to get wages up. This government has made a deliberate decision to keep wages flat while prices are skyrocketing, and it's just making life so difficult for people that they can't even get their deposits together to start off with. So we have to address cost of living through wages growth, economic growth. We have to bring down the cost of those big ticket items I talked about before in terms of childcare, getting to a doctor, and electricity costs.
Trevor, how is the Morrison government addressing or assisting housing affordability?
Yeah, I spend a significant amount of time and energy thinking about both housing availability and housing affordability. And with respect to the question, I don't think that there is a single silver bullet or concrete solution to this. I think it needs to be, it's a challenge that needs to be attacked from multiple fronts all at once. It really does. Madonna, I think, correctly mentioned the issue of supply. Here in this part of the world, we're growing so strongly. Everyone does want to move here and live here and work here, and supply is just not keeping up. And like it or not, the federal government doesn't have control over all of these levers when it comes to either the release of land or development approvals or planning and so on. We do have to work closely with other levels of government to try to get better outcomes there. Speaking of better outcomes, obviously the federal government does have significant initiatives and funding on the table for the incentivisation and the building of new community housing, an additional $2 billion in the budget that was handed down just last month. And the other piece of the puzzle, of course, is state and public housing. And I think this is something that federal governments into the future need to put a lot more work into in terms of getting better results from the long-term bipartisan federal support that there's been for the federal government delivering this sort of funding to states. It's delivered in multi-year blocks. The last multi-year block was negotiated when soon after I became an MP in about 2017, I think it was. And when that 4-year package of funding to the states to help support new community housing was being negotiated, we tried to get some numbers out of states and territories. How many new homes have you achieved with the billions of dollars that we put into that last agreement? Many of them didn't want to share the numbers, but ultimately when we got to the bottom of it, there was less community state housing at the end of those billions of dollars. It was almost as if the federal government had paid states to remove it. And we've got to do much better at ensuring that there's accountability and results there. The Courier Mail, I think just a couple of months ago, actually revealed that here in Brisbane, under the last multi-year agreement, I think we've been giving something along the lines of $300-something million to the state government. There are now 26 fewer community housing places in the suburb of Lutwyche. There's about 16 fewer, all sold by the state government housing department in Stafford, and so on and so forth through our local suburbs. We've got to do better than that.
Tiana, do you want a final word on housing affordability?
I was worried. I was like, oh, we're being left out. But yeah, I've got my little book of everything we sign up to.
I see that.
And yeah, it's pretty cute, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, the Animal Justice Party recognises and is guided by the expertise of the Australian Council of Social Services. So we support all of their initiatives, such as a proactive national housing strategy, including animal-friendly housing too. I'm not done, guys. A sustained investment in affordable housing, tax reform, supporting the Raise the Rent for Good campaign, raising all income support to at least $70 a day, preferably more, and capping rent at 20%. We've also got some policies including like reducing the occurrence of zoonotic diseases, which I don't believe any other political party is willing to address. The fact that COVID comes from animals, essentially, so we've got to end animal wet farms, factory farming, destroying habitat, introducing more bats into our housing. And we've also got another, not jobs guarantee, which is pretty cool too, the universal basic income. So that's replacing the existing complicated and expensive social welfare system with simple non-obligation payments to every citizen, which has been suggested as an effective way to eliminate poverty and redistribute wealth. Yeah. One more. Taxing fossil fuels.
Plethora of responses. Okay, hello.
Hi. So 6 months prior to the pandemic, my grandmother sadly passed away in an aged care centre. Even back then, it was understaffed and her life there was tough, regardless of all the wonderful staff that helped her during her time. During the pandemic, the stories coming out of aged care homes were nothing but horrifying. Firstly, to Trevor, with your party in office for a decade, how did you let it get so bad? And secondly, to the panel, how will you fix it?
Trevor.
Well, firstly, can I say I'm so sorry to hear about your grandma. My grandma's in aged care as well, and so this is a very real issue for many of us. The Royal Commission that the government called with a strong recognition that there were entrenched issues in that sector found, to be fair, that this wasn't just an issue from recent years. It was an entrenched issue that Australians have faced for many decades. That was the finding of the Royal Commission, and the government called it because we knew that there were systemic issues in that sector. What we've done since is work very hard, both to bring the funding to the table, but also to work on the reforms that are needed to respond to the Royal Commission. What we saw immediately after it was, I think it was an $18.8 billion injection of funding into that sector. It's the biggest injection that sector has ever seen in the history of Australia. On top of that, obviously, there's a series of regulatory and legal changes that we're pursuing through the Parliament in tranches. So we continue to work very hard on it. I think that we are going to continue to see further funding required, and fundamentally it is going to come down to the money and the way that we fund that sector, and we need to do it in a stronger and possibly more flexible way than we have been traditionally.
Madonna?
So addressing the aged care failure in this country is a key priority for Labor, and you will all probably recall that that was the centrepiece of Labor's budget reply. And the reason for that was because we did have a Royal Commission and there were recommendations, and we need to act on these ASAP. So what will Labor do? Labor will first of all ensure that there is a nurse in every nursing home 24 hours a day. Labor will increase the care hours provided to each individual in a nursing home to 250 minutes per day. That actually will give people the opportunity to be taken for a walk or for a push in their wheelchair outside, as opposed to hopefully getting a meal, which is the case not in all nursing homes, let's be fair. A number of them are very, very good, but we need to bring in standards that actually restore the dignity and humanity back into our nursing homes. Labor will also fight for wage increases for care workers. They are the most poorly paid workers in this country, and they deserve a pay rise. And I speak to them almost daily, and I hear this consistently, and Labor will be behind a wage rise. What Labor will also do for nursing homes and for our elderly to look after them is ensure that there are nutrition standards for nursing homes, and that will stop, I hate to say it, the slop we've seen in images across televisions that show us just how poor things are in nursing homes across Australia. And the last thing Labor will do, the fifth point of Labor's aged care plan, is to make sure that there is accountability and transparency in the funding that the federal government gives to aged care providers. We need to make sure that aged care provision is not profit-driven but people-driven, and there seems to be a bit of an imbalance there at the moment, and some transparency around that will go a long way to changing the culture and the focus of the efforts that are put into looking after our elderly, whom we should be looking after.
Justin, does the United Australia Party support a pay rise for aged care workers?
Absolutely. They're one of our most critical staff members, looking after the frail and the most vulnerable people in our community. And I certainly have witnessed, like the gentleman there, the degradation in our elderly facilities, especially with the food. The food's terrible. So I think we just need to put in definitely more accountability, bring in more people immigration-wise to fill the positions, because there are a lot of positions that need to be filled to adequately solve the issue of servicing the retirement community. And we have not released our policy yet based on how much we are going to spend. We have put forth that we're going to inject $40 billion directly into the hospitals, not via the states, but directly to the hospitals to improve them, because we haven't seen much improvement in the hospitals over the last decade.
Sorry, what was that figure? How much?
40 billion. So that equates to a fair bit of money, and apparently waving figures around. But so we're actually quite concerned about the hospital systems as well, and aged care would certainly fall into that mantra as well. So I know the team would be looking at that very closely, and we'll be coming out with that policy shortly.
Okay. I'm conscious of time, ladies and gents. It's about 7:45. Ken, my human TikTok, do we have time for 2 more questions, says Ken. Let's see. Keep them tight. Let's end on a high. Oh, hang on a second. So you've got the same shirt on that Marcus had on. Are you going to ask about airport noise as well?
No, there was a focus before on pills leading to an improvement in health outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to emphasise that it's not pills that are going to make a difference in terms of health outcomes, it's public health measures. And I guess my question really across is to do with what public health measures each of the candidates would offer. And particularly, I guess we're focused on the social determinants of health. That makes the biggest difference, and that will make the biggest difference to those in this electorate in terms of death rates and chronic illness. And I guess particularly, I think we have to think of the Indigenous when we think of social determinants of health. I think we should reflect on the fact or hear what would be done in that regards. Just
Okay.
finally, Trevor mentioned about clean air in Brisbane. In fact, we have dirty air. Air pollution kills 6,000 people as a cause of 6,000 deaths in Australia, and including Brisbane. We've got it causes a significant amount of mortality and morbidity, and it's partly related to poor traffic emission standards.
Okay, thank you, sir. Stephen Bates, public health initiatives.
Where to start? Health is holistic, and in order to improve people's health outcomes and public health outcomes, we have to have a holistic solution. So, like you said, pills they're good, drugs are good, and they help improve people's well-being. Don't quote me on drugs are good, but although we do want to legalize cannabis. But to go back to your point, it's about addressing those structural issues that lead to worse health outcomes. So in regards to, we've talked a little bit about mental health up here on the panel this evening. We need to get mental health covered by Medicare so that people get equal access to such a fundamental and important service in their lives. And that will address the huge issues that we're seeing emerge in our society, higher suicide rates, higher self-harm rates, all these things that no one seems to be talking about and no one seems to be taking any structural steps towards addressing. We also want to get dentistry covered by Medicare as well. So that, if you can believe it, would be $77 billion over a decade. We can pay for that entirely by ending subsidies to the fossil fuel industry with money left over. So it's not necessarily about whether or not we can afford these things, it's about having the priorities to actually acknowledge that these are the important issues that the people of Australia need addressed and actually taking steps to address them. And in regards to your, just to keep going on your reference to First Nations health outcomes, they're among the absolute worst on the planet. The average life expectancy for a First Nations person in this country is about the mid-40s. For white Australians, it's the early 80s. Having that, there's no other word apart from incredible disparity in health outcomes for our First Nations people is a result of just 200 centuries of the impacts of colonization. So what we need to do is put First Nations people at the center of decision making. I think as a panel full of white people, we can all agree, we've probably done enough talking. What we need to do is put First Nations people at the center of decision making, because First Nations people know what policies they need to improve their lives and improve their health outcomes. It is not the job of the government to come in and tell them what they need. We should be listening to them, and they should be forming policy that the government then supports.
Madonna, when it comes to Medicare, why isn't dental included?
Labor is the builder of Medicare, and Labor will strengthen Medicare. Let's not forget that. At this point in time, Labor has not made an announcement in relation to whether dentistry will be brought in under Medicare. Let's wait and see. But I think to go back to the point that you were making is, what are the public health measures? As I mentioned earlier, I spent probably the first, 7 years of my working career in the health sector, and we have to deal with health from a prevention and a cure perspective. And obviously it's far better for people, it's far better for our economy if we do deal with prevention from the get-go. And, that is a holistic approach. That's addressing lifestyle. It's making sure we can deal with climate change. It's looking at the health implications, for instance, of climate change and what needs to be amended in our society, whether or not that be reducing emissions, but, what are we doing about public spaces? What are we doing about public transport, etc.? All these things accumulatively can impact people's health. And so from Labor's perspective, they will be looking at health holistically from a prevention, and then from a cure perspective, Labor will strengthen Medicare, and yes, we will bring mental health back in under Medicare.
Tiana, you have a view on public health initiatives?
So first off, I would like to say whether you're aware that Australia is the worst child obesity rate in the world, more than America. So that's a problem in itself. But one of our initiatives is to create a healthier food system. So I can't remember what the statistics is exactly, but like 70 to 80% of health conditions are lifestyle related. So end subsidies to harmful industries, ban advertising of carcinogenic food, so that's food that causes cancer and is known to, fund education of plant-based diets, as it's been shown that it's the healthiest diet on the World Health Organization is plant-based, end factory farming to protect communities and workers, as people working on factory farms, piggery factory farms, 95% of them all have respiratory conditions. And then that just goes out to the communities, which are generally poorer communities, people of colour and Indigenous communities are then affected most by our factory farming. But also you might have heard recently that there was the Japanese, I'm going to mispronounce this, encephalitis virus? Yes, encephalitis, which is from a result of factory farming, which of course we need to address. And the only way the government has told us to react into this pandemic is to get vaccinated. So we're just going to keep getting vaccinated for every disease that churns out of factory farming. And of course, they also said, wear mosquito repellent. So, thank you.
Some common ground there between Tiana and the LNP, Anne Ruston, who may be the incoming health minister, actually mentioned childhood obesity as one of her priorities. But more broadly, public health and the LNP, what do you see as the priorities there?
Yeah, I guess a couple of quick points on that, because there are a number of aspects to it. So obviously in recent years, the federal government's co-funding of state public health, our hospital system, has increased by double-digit increases each and every year. So we're getting very close to the point now actually in Australia where the federal government is paying approximately half of the costs of our hospital networks run by the states. So we continue to work very closely with the states on that. That includes a range of everything from emergency through to other things, including mental health. There's been significant mental health reforms and funding put on the table. Most recently, of course, a couple of weeks ago, the Health Minister Greg Hunt announced that Brisbane North would be getting a new Headspace centre in our part of the world, and so that was a very exciting recent announcement on that front. But I take the point that the person asking the question originally made. Preventative health is, of course, where it's all at, and I think the incoming health minister, Anne Ruston's, made some good comments in relation to that. And this is actually the challenge in so many areas of public policy, right? It's not just about trying to treat, the symptoms of any sort of challenge. This is the case right across so many departments and areas of work of government. It's about trying to peel out bit by bit money that we're currently spending on treating symptoms and try to take things back to the cause in a preventative way.
She's not the health minister yet. You've got to win an election, May 21. Ladies and gents, I'm going to wrap up with a very brief final question, but I think I'd make the point that the conversation doesn't stop here. How fortunate you are to have these candidates turn up tonight, and also I'm going to suggest would be open to answering a phone call, talking to you, hearing from you over the course of not just the coming 3 weeks, but whatever happens beyond May 21. But that is election day. I think there were something like 34 polling booths in the electorate last time.
Yeah, 37 now.
37 now. You just keep growing. 36. Look at you all. You got to use the microphone, Trevor.
New booths at Tenerife and Newstead.
Well, that's my question to you. May 21, where will you be voting? And will you be having a snag, a cake, buying some jam? What's the plan, Justin?
It's going to be a hectic day. I haven't even thought about where I'm going to be voting. I'll probably vote in my hometown of Lutwich, I suppose. That might be a good place to start. I'll have a snag for sure, as long as the onions are on top.
Nice.
And I'll be certainly looking forward to a beer or two at the end of the night. So, we've got a bit of a party planned, and hopefully it'll be an exciting day for everybody, and let the best man and lady win.
Where's Clive going to be on the night of the 21st?
I'm not sure. He's coming up. I'll see him next week at some stage, so I might grill him about that, but he'll probably be around his hometown, but he's getting busy going around all of Queensland at the moment, so I would say he'll be down on the Gold Coast.
Okay. Madonna, where are you going to vote? What are you going to eat?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'll probably end up going back to my old stomping ground at the Lavella Centre in Rosalie, Paddington. So that's where my family are traditionally. It's where I went to school. It's where my family currently lives. So I think that'll be the place to lodge the ballot. And what will I be eating? Yes, I'll definitely have a democracy sausage, no question about it. No onions though, Justin, for me. What will I do on election day other than be extremely busy like every panellist is here and be available to answer that last question that a voter might have of me before they go in and cast their ballot. And I think I'll be looking forward to a beer and a decent sleep on Saturday night. But I think actually I'll be having a party because we're hoping that we'll win Brisbane, but we may not. But even then, we'll still have a party to celebrate the efforts that everybody's put in and the fact that we've been able to have a robust discussion around politics and ultimately it's obviously the people's choice as to who gets elected and who doesn't. But my dad turns 80 the day before, so I think he won't want to have a big party on the 20th, so I think we'll have a few extra cheeky celebrations for him on the 21st.
Happy birthday, Dad. Stephen, where are you going to be on the 21st of May?
I think I'm the same. I haven't thought that far ahead yet. It's just that my brain operates in 48-hour cycles during the campaign. I think I will probably end up doing early voting, so I'll be at City Hall doing that. Democracy sausage, most likely, but I definitely have more of a sweet tooth. So I will be very excited to see if anyone's baked any delicious goods. I will be probably eating far too many of those.
Tiana, thought about where you're going to vote yet? And this will be the first time that you vote?
Yes, it will be. And I can vote for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what will I be doing that day? Well, voting. What will I be eating? Oh, something nice.
Something vegetarian.
Vegan.
Or vegan, yep. You haven't picked your booth though yet?
No, I haven't.
That's okay, you got time. Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I tend to do a bit of a tour of some of the polling booths on the day. Last time I voted here in New Farm, and I'll probably do the same thing again. I'll have a democracy sausage and probably far too much coffee on the day. And for folks looking for me, there will be 3 early voting centres. So there'll be the one at City Hall that there usually is. There'll be one at St James on the edge of Spring Hill in the Valley, and the one that's up at Chermside on the corner of Roadie Road and Gympie Road as well. So I'll spend a lot of time there if people want to come and say g'day and can't find me at the mobile offices that I hold around Brisbane.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're a key seat. This is a key contest in this election. There has been a contest of ideas tonight, and I think we are all richer for that experience. Please put your hands together for the candidates in the seat of Brisbane. Thanks to Communify for hosting the event. Hooray for democracy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.